Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is Tell Us Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hi, everyone. Today we are talking to someone I have been trying to get on the podcast for some time. I've been talking about her forever, read her book a couple of times. She is the author of a beautiful memoir called Sitting Pretty, about a body that looks and moves differently. She's a disability advocate and the creator of the Instagram account Sitting Pretty. Please welcome Rebecca Taussig. This is her book right here. Rebecca, it's so good to see you and hear your voice.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on to have this conversation.
Listen, I discovered you on Instagram, and I think I saw your book maybe in, the discoveries on Instagram. I started following you and read your book, and I have to say that it is in my top 3 all-time favorite books ever.
Me too.
And I think, no, really, I'm not saying that to just blow smoke. I really, truly mean it. It is... it's been a game changer for me, and it's one of those books that I think everybody should read. So maybe for people who aren't familiar with who you are or, about your book, why don't you start by telling us why you wrote the book Sitting Pretty?
Well, it started a long time ago. I've been disabled since I was 3, so I think it starts there. I had cancer when I was really young, and the treatments, surgeries, chemo, radiation eventually led to me becoming paralyzed. And so I grew up in this disabled body. I got my first wheelchair when I was 6, and I was part of a really big family. I'm the youngest of 6, so I was just sort of one of many rowdy kids, kind of bumbling around together. And my disability really wasn't a big point of conversation in our family. It wasn't a focus. And when I became paralyzed, my parents didn't really go about making a ton of accommodations for our space. It was just sort of, I just existed in the body that I did. But as I got older, I did start to recognize the ways that I was different, or feel the ways that I was different. But I didn't really have language to understand that. So I really internalized a lot of that experience into shame in my difference, and feeling really a lot of shame for not fitting into what I should be, or there was this expectation that I should be. So I went all the way into my 20s, kind of accumulating that shame and trying really hard to fit and erase disability from myself and distance myself from my disability. And it was in graduate school, when I was in my late 20s, that I first started reading disability studies, reading work by scholars who were really talking about the conception of these notions of disability and normal, and the history of these terms, and kind of bringing to light frameworks like ableism, and thinking about how the world is structured to categorize bodies and the implications of those categorizations. So that changed everything for me. I suddenly had language and ideas that could help me process up at that point, like a couple of decades of life that I just hadn't really been able to understand before. So as someone who goes to writing as a space to understand, I just started writing a lot of really personal reflections and capturing snippets of my life as I was reading this scholarship, as I was kind of stumbling into these ideas that were revelatory for me. And so I went online first and just started, I had called them now mini memoirs of little snippets of my life, and rethinking memories, and taking stock of the present. And I spent a few years doing that. I would think I was maybe like 3 or 4 before the book came to be. And eventually I was just getting to this space where I was reaching the limitations and the confines of that space. I think the word limit or character limit is something like 2,200 words on Instagram. And I would sit down to write something, and I would try to be so brief, and I'd polish it up, and it would be like 3 times too long. So it was becoming really evident that I needed this space to go deeper and tell more stories. And so the book evolved from that space. Yes. And I think overall it's a book that I wished I had when I was younger. It's a book that I didn't have. And needed. So I'm so glad to know that it resonated with you. I can't tell you how much it means to know that it connected with you and your experience and thinking about the world too. So
I mean, the thing that is so beautiful about your book and your writing is that you really can transport the reader into your life and what it was like being a young girl. I mean, you said you didn't have your first wheelchair till you were 6, and you describe yourself as a child like, I mean, you were dragging yourself around, and no one thought of you any differently than you were just a part of the family, and off you went. And you know, your book starts off with you talking to your brother David. And it's really incredible to read about that conversation and how you were feeling and trying to get him, like, he was there. He was a witness to your childhood. Yet, seeing you as an adult, very different, right? Making those. So what I found really interesting was you always thought of yourself as beautiful. You were Rebecca, and you were a princess and beautiful and a part of the family, and that's who you were. But that changed. When did that change?
yeah, it was a slow transition with 100 million tiny moments. I don't think I could say when I was 6, I had this incident on the playground and then everything changed. It was a million tiny moments. And I think part of the early bits of that would be me noticing the ways that people outside of my family reacted to me. I did notice that adults seemed to have some sort of misty emotional expression on their faces when I would, I don't know, say something brave. I started to piece that together. And I did notice that kids interacted with me differently. When I was in 2nd grade, so I was about 8 years old, we moved to a new city and a new school, and I didn't know any of those kids. And it was the first time in my life that I had been in a space with that many new people. And the kids were so excited about me coming to their class, which on the one hand felt good, that people wanted to know me, it felt like. But there was something different and odd about that attention. And I started to piece it together that I was a little bit more like a class pet or a shiny new toy that they could push to recess than I was another person in the class. And eventually the shininess of the wheelchair kind of wore off. And there was this different kind of distance between us. So I started to notice those things early. I think as my peers hit different mile markers in life, I noticed it as well. So when they started dating, and then I suddenly realized that this was going to be different for me. When they started looking for jobs, and all of the jobs that high schoolers get were jobs that I could never see myself doing. I couldn't, like waitressing and lawn care work and all of these things that were spaces that were inaccessible to me. So how do I participate and contribute to those spaces? And then when people were started to go away to school, and I was very overwhelmed by finding an accessible campus and that whole world. So I think mile markers were a big part of it too. But I feel like one of the biggest parts of that transition for me, or that recognition for me, was communicated through media and storytelling. Being saturated in a world of stories and through television and books that I'm reading, but even just like magazine covers, as I'm going through the grocery store with my dad on Saturday mornings, like the representation of lives that were worth paying attention to looked nothing like me. And if I ever saw any kind of disabled person or character that was included in those stories, it was something that was completely foreign to me. It was not a person I recognized. It would be a very sad, devastating character in the story, or it would be someone who was just like over the top, triumphant hero, or just someone there to kind of contribute to the main character's story in some really trite way. So I never really saw a person like me thriving in like a romantic comedy, or I didn't really see a person like me in some sort of story arc about finding a career or about being a mother or even just like having some kind of high school drama. Like that didn't exist. So I think all of those things combined were those 110 moments of affirmation that you don't fit here. And what I heard from that or believed from that was you don't belong here. We don't want you here, and this world is not for you.
It really, I listen to you, and of course, when I read your book, I'm reading it through the lens of a parent of a disabled child. And it really, it hits me in a way that is very painful because I know that there is shame, right? There's shame around disability. And that shame it's from everywhere. It is, as you described, it's coming everywhere from us. Like, well, you're in a wheelchair, so how could you have a baby? And how could you, like, oh, you don't need do you have sex? Like, oh, really? Like, these questions and these ideas and these thoughts are so brutal. And I find the same with my son, right? My son is treated like a baby. He's 14 years old. So he's treated like a baby. And, everybody does everything for him and they look at it. He also has alopecia, so he has no hair right now. So, of course, they look at him and they feel even more sorry for him because they have ideas in their head of why maybe. So can we talk a little bit about, first I want to talk about ableism, right? Because this is a word that people are hearing more and more. And I think that people still don't understand what ableism is. And you point out in your book that, the dictionary describes ableism as one way, but you have your own description. And I prefer your description.
Oh, thank you. I do too. Well, I think that the standard definition is just so insufficient. It's so barely scratches the surface. And I think it reinforces what a lot of people think of with ableism. So I think the standard definition is like discrimination against disabled people. And I think what most people think of when they hear the word, if they've heard it at all, is being mean to disabled people, or maybe one step further might be like not hiring them because they're disabled or something along those lines. I think that ableism is a lot more pervasive, deeply rooted, and tangled up in every breath that we breathe in the world around us. So my definition would be something more along the lines of ableism is a set of beliefs and structures that favor and fetishize and build the world around a largely imagined and idealized body, and while discriminating against anybody that moves or looks or processes or operates or sees or hears differently than that largely imagined idealized form. And the greater the deviation from that sort of idealized center, the greater the discrimination or the greater the impact of that system. So, I mean, that shows up in the obvious and kind of first thing we think of is like buildings that don't accommodate people with different abilities. And, like the most prevalent thing people think of is wheelchairs and ramps and elevators. That's even like the symbol on the parking spots is the little blue icon with the wheelchair. And that's the beginning of it. But it's so much more than that too, right? It has to do with what we believe is a quality of life, what we believe is a life worth caring for, including belonging. It you brought up like sex and having a baby, like what lives we want to attach ourselves to when we go on dates, and who we choose to be partnered up with, and who we grant custody to when we're looking at parents and abilities of parents and diagnosis of different parents. It has to do with who is included, who we want here, who's invited, who this is all for, right? Who this world is for, and who is pushed out, erased, ignored, and not considered. So I think that sometimes ableism looks like the playground bully who's mean to the disabled kid, and that's real, and that matters, and that hurts. But it's so much more than that too, and it has to do with the impact of that is what it feels like to wake up every morning in a world where you don't know if you will be welcomed or included, or where your spot will be, versus waking up in a world that was sort of built around someone that looks and moves and operates like you. And it's difficult to articulate the difference to people who've not felt that impact of that. But I think one of the things I'm working through in the book is that I think all of us are familiar with the impact of it to some extent, because we all live in bodies, and bodies ultimately all age. They all strain under stress. They all are subject to viruses. They all can get sick. They're complicated. We move in and out of disabled states all the time. I was just pregnant a couple of years ago, and the experience of pregnancy was so familiar to the experience of disability. In fact, and this is maybe a conversation for another time, but like even just being a parent reminds me of things about being accessibility and disability, like having to think about access in a whole different way just as a parent. I think there are ways that ableism hits us in different lights and different times over the course of our lives. And we are all impacted by that, and we're all punished by that system, but it does punish some people a lot more than others.
Definitely. A long time ago, I highlighted something you wrote, and you wrote, ableism thunders in the background of every conversation, every story, every building. And I think that you go on by saying it's the atmosphere we breathe, the body of principles, the rules we live by. So it's very, no one is perfect, right? But we seem to aspire to be perfect. And I think that's where the shame comes in. It's why we're scared to admit maybe that we have mental health challenges. It's why we're afraid to mention that maybe you have a hidden disability and you don't want to share that with anybody, because we are supposed to be, or we have been groomed to believe that we must be perfect in order to be successful, in order to be happy, in order to be all of these things. And, I know that you have a niece who has Down syndrome. So your sister has experience as, the sister of, you being disabled, and the mother of a disabled daughter. And, when you have a child with Down syndrome, you are bombarded by questions similar to the questions that you would have received, right? Where, did you do testing? Did you know he was going to have Down syndrome? Oh, what spectrum is he on? Oh, did you know if you took more vitamin D, he might not have had Down syndrome? Like all these things that come at you, right? That are so invasive and so damaging and filled with shame and filled with, fear. And so that's what I find so giving in your writings, Rebecca, is that you explore shame, you explore fear, you really force the reader to understand that, we are all the same, and so just hearing you talk about it, really, hits in a really tender place for me. And I'm curious as to how you feel parents fit into, advocacy for disability, if you will?
Mm-hmm. I think that's such a good question. And I think this is evolving for me as a new parent. Because when I wrote the book, I was not a mom. I didn't even know I found out I was pregnant like less than 24 hours after I submitted the final manuscript. So it was not on my radar. And so I think that this is something that is evolving for me, over time. And I think is more complicated maybe than I would have thought before. I think the parents that I've talked to since the book has come out, I think the ones that I'm having conversations with are the ones that I have a lot of faith in, because they're listening to adults with disabilities, right? They're seeking out those voices and seeking out those perspectives. I think that often parents of kids with disabilities think that because they're a parent to a child with a disability, that they understand that experience to the full extent and they are experts and they know. And I think there is something very different about being in that body and living it out for yourself versus parenting it. And I think that what I'm learning, as a new parent is that I think being a parent to any child is so much harder than I realized. So much harder than I realized. Oh, I just see my parents' experience and like reflecting back on their experience with me in such a different light. Otto is the age right now that I was when I was first diagnosed with cancer, and so it's just been very eye-opening to me. But I think that listening to adults speak about the experience of disability is important or even just other voices that are a little bit farther along. I don't know that it needs to be adults, but like listening to the disabled individuals themselves, and empowering them to speak for themselves. And that, I think one thing between my mother and I is that that we've kind of we're continuing to work out, is that she had a story for me, that she arrived at through her own pain in having a child go through this experience and wanting to protect me and wanting to empower me. So she crafted a story for me, that had been healing for her. And I adopted that story for a long time too, but it wasn't a story that I wrote for myself. It was a story I inherited that had been given to me. And it was a story about a really bright, sunny, chipper girl who was so brave, and a lot of it was wrapped up in faith. Faith was a huge part for my parents of coping with my sickness. I really was supposed to die. I don't know how they survived this. Faith was a huge part of how they survived that. And so that became a huge part of the story I inherited. And for me, it became really important to write my own story and tell my own story. And that story was a little bit more complicated and had more darkness in it than my mom's story ever did. And I think that's been difficult for her she literally wrote a book called Rebecca's Story about what happened to us and who I became. And mine is different than that. My story is different from that. And I feel like I'm learning more every day as a mom how painful that process of having a different story from your child would be. But I do think that it is important to empower your child to be able to tell their own story. And that might look like different things depending on what age that child is or who that child is or even what kind of disability they have. I don't know. But that was big for me, being able to decide for myself what this means to me instead of being told what it means to me. So that's hard. Harder than I know I even can realize right now.
Yeah. It's making me take deep breaths because I find it very emotional what you're saying because it's truth, right? And it's hard as a parent, as you're finding it now.
Unbearable. It is
unbearable.
Yeah.
And when you have a disabled child, you can't help but want to build a wall of protection, right?
Yes.
And it's very hard to admit, this isn't about me. This is about my child and their experience in life and, trying to determine what are where our lines are, right? And I have 2 daughters, and they are very, like, listen, my youngest is very quick to be the first one to say, "You're treating Beckett like a baby right now." He's 14.
Wow. How old is she?
She just turned 11 the other day.
Okay. All right. Wow.
And she always says, what? How come I have to empty the dishwasher and Beckett doesn't?
My niece's little sister is similar to that. It's interesting. The sibling, they've got a different take on it, right? They are quick.
It's very interesting, right? And so it really, like, so again, I totally agree with everything you said, and I do look to people like you to understand this experience better. Okay, there's more things I want to talk about. But before we do that, I just want to mention that, one of the things we do on this podcast is we like to give back, and we ask our guests to choose a registered Canadian nonprofit organization to give $500 to. And you chose somewhere I have never heard of. I just started following them on Instagram. I just looked them up. Tangled Art and Disability, which is an organization dedicated to enhancing opportunities for artists with disabilities to contribute to the fabric of our society. And I know that you did some research because you are American, so we have to have a Canadian charity, and you did a little bit of research and you came up with Tangled Art and Disability. And I mean, thank you.
Oh, I was so excited when I found them. Like, it just seems like the coolest group of people. I think one of the things I loved about it was, I wanted to do something that was working with disability. A lot of disability nonprofits work in maybe, I don't know, what would we say, like more practical? It's more like independent living and kind of support systems in that way. But I really love investing in the art and culture of disability. And that just, to me, is kind of not only like needed, but just like delicious, and something that I just was so excited that we could contribute to. And I'm like, are they doing anything in the States, or is there something like that in the States? I need to do more research for that. But I was so excited. About them.
Well, they're going to get $500 in your name. So thank you for choosing them. Okay. So let's just talk a little bit about being scared of disability.
Yes.
So somebody sees you, you're in a wheelchair, and they can't stop staring, and they are scared of you. You have probably been stared at more than the average person, and felt pity from other people who don't even know you. They know nothing about your life. They have judged you just on the fact that you use a wheelchair. So talk to me about what happens if someone feels scared when they see somebody with a disability.
Mm-hmm. Well, what
do they do?
Oh gosh. Okay. Where do we start?
Lots of questions there. Sorry.
No, it's wonderful. This is the best. I love this conversation. I think, first of all, I just would want to point out that I think a lot of times the reason we have fear about these experiences is that we, to go back to like the stories that we tell about disability, they're so often such a dramatic skewing of what the actual experience is. And so we see these dramatic, tragic, or like unbelievably triumphant stories when really the experience of disability is so ordinary. It's such an ordinary life. And I think that disconnect is in large part because we have inherited and we continue to perpetuate these stories that create these mythic experiences that are not true. So I think that's part of why that fear is there. And I just want to say that my hope is we're moving in a direction where we have so many more stories that this becomes ordinary, right? Ordinary in the way that any life is, and then specific and triumphant and tragic in the way that every life is, right? So I think that's part of it. I think if we're thinking about advice for people, I think part of it might be to, I like the idea of just taking note of that fear, right? Of like, let's not pretend like that didn't happen. That path, that fear crossed through me or passed through me, and recognizing that that's there is important. To recognize that you have maybe that impulse or that bent towards fear of disability, and what do we do with that? And in the moment, I think I don't know, definitely depends on the context and who you're with and what's happening. But I think in the moment, I think as much as we can just treat people like unique human beings, like I would treat any human being I haven't met yet, right? This is just another person who is living a life that I know nothing about. So I think going into those interactions with as few assumptions as possible, and just I guess if there's any assumption, it's just like, here's another human being. I've probably come across 80 at the course of today already, and here's another. But I think if we want to think about the long term kind of it's not solution, but response to that fear that you maybe felt pass through you, is to do that work on your own of seeking out more stories, right? Listening to more voices. And there's so many ways to do that in the world we live in now. I mean, we've talked a lot about Instagram today and like social media. There's so many disabled creators online right now. I occupy the space of Instagram, but I think TikTok has got a whole bunch of them too. I don't go on Twitter. I'm scared of Twitter, but I think Twitter has a lot of people too. Like listen to what people are saying, day to day. And there's also, things you can read and watch. I like my book, but there's a lot of others. Disability Visibility is this whole collection that came out of
that. Yes.
First person. Yeah, I love part of what I love about it. So it's a collection of first person essays of people with all different kinds of disabilities writing about their own stories. And what I love about it is like the exact opposite of my book. If my book takes a deep dive into one person's story, this is like, let's read a whole bunch, right? Like, let's hear from so many different perspectives and experiences. So that's another kind of way to dive in.
There are a ton of books out there. I mean, I try to put them up on, I'm like you, I prefer Instagram. It's just, I'm a visual person and it feels kinder to me. Instagram feels kinder.
I think so too. Yes.
So chapter 7 is the complications of kindness. And I mean, I know we're running out of time, and so we're not going to deconstruct this entire chapter, even though I would love to. It is probably one of my favorite chapters of the book, just because, we think we're supposed to be kind. We're supposed to be kind, Rebecca. We're supposed to be kind to people. And we need to be extra kind to people who have disabilities because they have a disability. And it is a black hole of kindness that is over the top, right? Like it is, I see it with my son.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it. I get it being the parent, the mother of a disabled child. I get it. Like, oh, are you okay? And you must be so busy and it must be so hard. And, but it's coming from a kind place. Ugh.
Well, this is interesting to hear you talk about that as a mom, because that's something I haven't really thought about. Again, as we've established, I'm new to this game of motherhood. But because so much of what I think of in that sort of kindness that's not actually kindness, that I'm talking about in that chapter, is a kindness that is often self-serving. It's often really actually about the person performing the kindness and not as much about the person who's supposed to be receiving it. And I know that because people get mad when you refuse that kindness, right? And it's like, oh, wait a minute. Who is this about? So it's interesting to hear you talk about that as a mom. And because I don't imagine that being self-serving as much as maybe fear of watching somebody struggle or in wanting, I don't know. What do you think? How would you describe that?
I find it's interesting because as the parent, I get the looks too, right? So because I'm such an I'm an extension of my son and he's an extension of me, and we travel, together. We walk down the street together holding hands and we, so I don't know. I've never really, that just kind of came out right now, Rebecca. And I didn't really think about it before I said it or the weight that it carried, because I do see looks of pity towards my son, but also towards me. And, I'll give you an example. When I was pregnant with my third child, I knew that I was having a girl. And so I have, Beckett, my son, and then my daughter Zoe, and then another girl, Poppy. And somebody said to me, oh, do you know what you're having? Because I've had a child with Down syndrome, everybody wants to know if I got tested again. Like, do I know? Like, are you like, would you do this again? And somebody said to me, oh, do you know what you're having? And I said, oh, we're having a girl. And they said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I said, what? And they said, oh, well, you probably wanted to have another boy because, Beckett.
What?
Yeah. So these are the things that get said to you and I feel like it's coming from a place of kindness in their mind.
Yes.
But there is nothing kind about it. It's in fact, it's leveling. It makes me feel sick. It destroys me. And so, there's a lot there. And that's just one example. Yeah. And I mean, I've had it from physicians and everybody, during both of my other pregnancies. So the kindness, that chapter really, it really, really, really spoke to me because it is I'm not disabled. My son is, yet I am, in a lot of people's eyes, I didn't produce a perfect child. So then whether you like it or not, your ego, right? And that's the hard thing to admit, really grossly hard to admit, that you are made to feel it, and so your ego feels it, that, ooh, I'm not so great because I didn't produce a perfect child. And did she choose to have that child? So it's very layered and it's very complicated. And that's why hearing from, disabled people and their own experiences is very helpful to a parent who is raising a disabled child.
Wow. I feel like we have at least 6 more hours of talking we need to do. I mean, there's just so much in just even this tiny bit. I love the ways that we're like kind of looking at the points of intersection and deviations in the experience of a parent with a parent to a child with a disability, and then this disabled adult. For me, the equivalent of a comment like that, I think would be. Sometimes people will say things to me like, if I woke up paralyzed, I wouldn't want to live anymore. Right. So I think the thing that makes those comments similar is I think what that person is doing is attempting to empathize. Like they're attempting to, and we're like empathy, right? That's like this thing that like the best thing a human being can do, right, is empathize, but like it's misguided. It's uninformed. I mean, I've kind of gotten tired of the word empathy, honestly, because so much of the time that I experience it is painful. This attempt to understand the thing that you cannot imagine, and attempting to understand how hard your life must be, just kind of flattens the whole experience. So I don't know if that feels like a similar.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And like you said, it is complicated. And it's almost like kindness is complicated, right? When it's coming at you, right?
Yeah.
And so you're right. We could talk for 6 hours about it. And maybe it's a conversation for another time, or maybe it's your next book, or I can't, Rebecca, it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I can't really, you were my dream come true. You're my dream guest because I have been wanting to talk to you for a long, long time. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak to us. I hope that everyone listening reads your book. Your book, Sitting Pretty, is available at your favorite bookstore. You can buy it online. You can follow Rebecca at Sitting Pretty on Instagram. And you can visit her website, which is Rebecca, REBEKAH, Taussig at TAUSSIG.com. Rebecca, thank you so, so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Honestly, you're my dream host because this has been such a wonderful conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.